Thank you for all joining us for this introduction to ESG webinar. It's hosted by NRM Regions Australia through their Industry Partnerships project, which is funded through the Australian Government Landcare Program, the National Landcare Program, and their Building Landcare Capacity projects. These webinars are relatively short and sharp, so I'll do the introductions and an acknowledgement of country. I'll then introduce our speaker for today, Edwina Clowes, and then we will have a Q&A. I'm going to ask that during the presentations, we're all muted. In fact, I think we've taken control of that, so you will all be muted. If you've got questions, please pop them into the chat, and we'll try and get to as many as we can while sticking to the 45 minutes limit. I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land of which we all gather and meet today across Australia. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Australian and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. In my case, I acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. Online today, there's myself as the project lead for the Industry Partnerships project, Beck Dahl, who's from Collab Forge, and if you run into trouble today, Beck is offering support. So pop your concerns into the chat if they're technical, and Beck will be able to deal with them. And our presenter today is Edwina Clowes. Edwina is the Manager for Sustainability Frameworks and Stakeholders at Meat Livestock Australia. So she's dealing with the way changes to international trade rules, market interventions, and environmental, social and governance corporate reporting is impacting Australian agriculture, particularly the red meat industry. This puts her in a great position for her to give us an insight and for us to pick her brain on this rapidly changing environment. So without further ado, I'll get Edwina to share her screen and give her the floor.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you for the opportunity and the time to present today. So I'll start by sharing screen. Great. Thanks, Kate. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. So Kate's asked me to speak on environmental, social and governance at a very high level, and I'll do that in regard to the Australian red meat and livestock industry. As Kate mentioned, my name's Edwina Clowes. I'm Manager of Sustainability Frameworks and Stakeholders at Meat and Livestock Australia. So when we talk about environmental, social and governance, in recent years, we've started to see a real escalation in discussion and activity around the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions and global warming caused by human activity. And we're now seeing countries and communities around the world calling for greater action, markets and governments starting to respond with regulations and government requirements, and investors and customers starting to work to minimise the impacts and the risks within their supply chains by investing in positive impacts and increasingly seeking. Sorry, is everything okay? And increasingly seeking to demonstrate their own environmental, social and governance performance to their investors and their shareholders. And that's what we mean by ESG. So it's essentially, I guess, the reflection of the negative externalities caused by an organisation with respect to the environment, society and corporate governance. And it's going to require organisations, and that's what used to be called the triple bottom line, and it's going to require organisations not to just account for their financial performance and corporate governance, but to also start taking into account their governance in terms of the environment and society. And these are some of the, the obvious issues in terms of environment: our greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, circular economy and water management. In terms of social, they include diversity and inclusion, human rights, working conditions, community relations. And in terms of governance, they relate to risk management, reporting and disclosures, executive remuneration and due diligence. And I mean, these actions and commitments just haven't happened overnight. They've been the result of sort of an evolution of international policy and scientific assessment over a number of decades. The most critical one of these being the Paris Agreement, the cooperation of parties COP21 Paris Agreement. So it was the first legally binding international treaty setting the limit to limit global warming to preferably 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And this was preceded by the establishment of the lead global scientific body, the International Panel on Climate Change in 1988. The UN Convention on Climate Change, that was the first international treaty to combat human invention of climate change. That was established in 1992. And the global endorsement of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So essentially the urgent call for action by all countries to work towards a shared blueprint, if you like, to end poverty, protect the planet and ensure peace and prosperity for all countries and all people by 2030. So they're the essential key commitments. There have been others as well, but I will keep moving on, I think. So on the back of these commitments, we're now seeing the world's largest economies, and in fact, more than 50% of Australia's top agricultural export markets now committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Interestingly, 69 of the world's 100 richest entities are indeed companies, not countries. But despite that, with over 70% of Australian agricultural products exported, these targets, regulations and commitments set by governments and markets will increasingly define market access, global trade and sustainable sourcing decisions. And with essentially a lot of the methodology and disclosures and reporting requirements underpinning greenhouse gas emissions already being refined or in the process of being finalised, the next imperative will be nature-related and biodiversity commitments, and we're currently seeing that playing out. And of course, taking a lead in all this is the European Union, and they're setting a range of policy initiatives. Most importantly, the EU Green Deal, which is a collective policy commitment to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, and their farm to fork strategy, which they claim will make food systems fairer, healthier and environmentally friendly. And the EU is now working to commit with its trading partners to implementing the Paris Agreement and other sustainable development commitments, and to disclosing and reporting ESG impacts through the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The Australian government too, of course, is committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and the Australian Accounting Standards Board is currently working to define the ESG reporting regime. So lots going on. So what does this mean for the Australian agricultural industry and the Australian red meat and livestock industry? We believe our industry has demonstrated real leadership and sustainability, but according to our own grazing management system. So it's not driven by regulations, but it's by ensuring that our industry embraces sustainability because it's productively, profitably and climate resiliently makes good sense. We know our ongoing investment to science and technology is world-class and evidence-based, and our methodologies and disclosures that we define our grazing system within the Australian regime is really important when it comes to negotiating the new rules of play on the global stage. And we believe it's clear through our Australian beef and sheep sustainability framework and our carbon neutral by 2030 goal and roadmap that the Australian industry is essentially a world leader in how we produce red meat sustainably. So I'll touch really at a very high level on the Australian beef and sheep sustainability frameworks. The frameworks define sustainability as the production of beef, sheep meat and wool in a manner that is socially, environmentally and economically responsible now and for future generations. The frameworks are industry-led, but they are customer and investor focused, and they commit industry to a pathway of best practice. They track performance through independent indicators that define the key sustainability issues. So what does best practice look like and how do they track performance and progress? Well, just like MLA has their own strategic plan 2025, where we actually essentially commit to the priorities of the industry, both the frameworks have their own strategic plans and work plans that define their key priorities and projects and their ongoing commitment to extensive external and stakeholder engagement. They also measure and report industry performance against sustainability issues through robust, relevant and defensible data. The frameworks undergo sort of robust, regular assessment of the materiality issues, and those issues are relevant to the 4 themes of best animal care, environmental stewardship, economic resilience, and people and community. And these assessments are done through a double materiality lens, so it assesses the issues that are important to our customers and investors in terms of their decision-making, but also the issues that industry actions impact, and that's what we call double materiality. The Australian Beef Sustainability Framework last year completed its 2nd materiality assessment. The first one was undertaken prior to the framework's inception in 2016, and the Sheep Sustainability Framework undertook its materiality assessment in 2020, prior to its inception and launch in April last year. And as you can see here, the sustainability issues are mapped in a matrix according to the industry's impacts and also the impacts of those issues on investors' and customers' decision-making. And you can see for the beef industry, the highly material sustainability issues have shifted significantly in the space of those 5 years. While issues such as animal husbandry, livestock transport, livestock health and welfare, water, greenhouse gas emissions and biosecurity have remained important, there's some new issues that have come into play: processing practices, biodiversity, soil health and forest and woodland. And the highly material issues relevant for the Sheep Sustainability Framework: animal health, animal welfare, biodiversity, food safety and quality, biosecurity, greenhouse gas emissions, water security and health, soil health and pasture management, and chemicals and safety. And as a result of these, sustainability issue assessments, the framework sort of issues that the frameworks commit to progressing forward will shift accordingly. So as we see markets, and the governments and supply chains start to define their own sustainability commitments, what does that mean for our industry and our producers and our supply chains? And what disclosures and reporting will we be required to undertake? We know that the beef and sheep frameworks commit to the highest governance in terms of materiality assessments and stakeholder engagements. We also know that the indicators, the metrics and the data that we report through the frameworks is transparent and evidence-based. But we also need to ensure that the methodology that we use and the measures, our disclosures and reporting are compatible with global schemes and standards, so that we can demonstrate our commitment and progress as defined by the Australian context, but against a global yardstick. And essentially the 2 global pillars when it comes to sustainability standard reportings are these 2, the Global Reporting Initiative and the International Sustainability Standards Board International Financial Reporting Standards. And both these standards are in the process of rolling out their exposure drafts in the forms of governance disclosures, sector disclosures and topic disclosures. Essentially, the big difference between these 2 standards is that the ISSB focuses on financial materiality. So it focuses on the impact that the company has, it focuses on the impact of sustainability on the company's own economic performance and value creation. And that's what we call financial materiality. In contrast, the Global Reporting Initiative focuses on impact sustainability. So it focuses on the impact the company has on economic, environment and social sustainability. And these standards will define the agreed requirements and methods and the disclosure and reporting requirements that industries, markets and companies will be required to report against. And this information will be sought right down the value chain to producers with evidence of good practice and data to prove it. So our frameworks are not surprisingly aligned with the UN SDGs, and we're currently investigating alignment with the Global Reporting Initiative because it's the most widely used global standard. And it's also the standard that, of course, investigates impact materiality right down the supply chain. So the materiality issues that our industries, that industries such as ours will need to report against going forward. And the GRI standards, I won't go into much detail, but they're essentially structured and organised against the 3 series of the universal standards, the sector standards, and the topic standards. And while these investigations have not yet been fully completed in terms of our investigation of our alignment of our frameworks to the GRIs, we know that there has been a really strong and pleasing collaboration and alignment between the high level, material issues in the sheep and beef sustainability frameworks and the GRI governance and key sector topics around animal health and welfare, greenhouse gas emissions and water. So, what does this all mean? We know that our investors and customers in the near future will be required to account for their sustainability in terms of their governance and strategy, their risk management. They'll need to set clear targets in terms of sustainability, and they'll need to account for their sustainability commitments and performance with reliable disclosures and data right down their supply chains, down to producers. We know that a number of the topics, including biodiversity, have yet to be fully played out, and our framework indicators around natural ecosystems and biodiversity still have yet to be fully defined, and the capacity to measure and collect that data against key metrics has yet to be fully articulated. So you can see how important that the on-the-ground work that the NRM regions and your land holders are doing will become increasingly important. And we also know that our customers and investors are going to need a lot more data, and it's just not from top-down, industry-level, national data, but comprehensive bottom-down farm data that speaks to good practice and positive impacts. So at the instigation of the region, and thanks to Kate Forrest's good work, we undertook a pilot study assessing the potential interaction between the regional NRM organisational plans and projects and our sustainability frameworks, and the pilots yielded some really fruitful results. These included that we found that there was incredibly strong alignment between the NRM regional plans and the framework's environmental stewardship priorities. That alignment weakened substantially when we go deeper into data, metrics and indicators. We know that NRM regions are extremely well placed to address market failure, particularly around biodiversity, soil health, drought preparedness, weed and pest management. That your regions have strong regional partnerships and credibility with a range of government and non-government players, and that you have an army of on-the-grounds people with direct linkages, producers with unique practical and technical expertise. And as we see pressures mounting to demonstrate sustainability commitments and performance, our producers and processors in the value chain are increasingly relying on our beef and sheep frameworks to inform their own sustainability commitments and pathways. And our customers and investors too are looking at the frameworks to align to their own sustainability commitments and the commitments of their livestock producers and supply chains to demonstrate that back to their board shareholders and their own customers and to support their own ESG requirements. And this is just a bit of an example of the interactions that the beef and sheep frameworks have had this year with an extensive number of external stakeholders. So what are the take-homes from all this? What does this all mean? Well, we know that there's certainly a lot more work to do, but we believe the Australian livestock industry is in a very good place. It's going to be important, critically important, to build that alignment between global schemes, industry frameworks and on-the-ground practice change. And we know that it's going to be increasingly important to have metrics and data that is transparent, reliable and relevant to demonstrate commitment and performance. And in terms of our producers, it will be very important for our producers to actually define their own value proposition or business case when it comes to sustainability practices, to start identifying their baseline and to start working on activities that work, improve or need to be stopped. Important to align to our industry sustainability frameworks as the pathway and the report card for our industries. Important to start collecting data to compare your baseline and to start tracking performance and progress. And then to start assessing the costs and the benefits and consider market opportunities in this new and emerging and incredibly important space. So I'll stop that there. Thank you very much, Kate, and to everybody for your participation. Very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwina. Yeah, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat or pop your little virtual hand up and I'll keep an eye out for you. The first one comes from Rob. Keogh, and he's asking, how does one interpret preferably in the context of 1.5 degree increase target? Seems to be a bit of a weasel word. I'm not sure if it is or not, Edwina.
Okay.
Okay, and from Jules up in NQ Dry Tropics, she's interested in your views on dingo management in terms of environmental sustainability and biodiversity, which is pretty on ground. So we'll see how you go.
That is very on ground, and I can't speak to that granularity, but I can chase up some further information from MLA. I noticed that Jacob's always on the line, also on the line, so he might be happy to take questions as well. Jacob's our manager of the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework and has a lot more intelligence and insights on the metrics and indicators and data than I do. But no, I can't speak to that, but I can certainly chase that question up. Thanks, Kate.
If there are questions that we can't answer, because we're recording this and I'll be sending the link to the recording out with an email to everyone who registered, I can make sure that I put the answers to those questions if we have them, because there's a fair few that we don't. Yeah, that they're in the email and the response there. Beck, can you unmute Jacob? I think he does have a contribution. Okay. And just while we're working that out, thanks, Edwina. How do you see MLA investing or co-investing in NRMs to deliver projects that help producers achieve framework outcomes? So that's from James. He's down in NRM South in Tassie, I think.
Hi, James. Thank you. I think it's very, very much important about collaboration. Like we know that there was a really strong alignment between the environmental stewardship priorities that the beef and sheep frameworks have and what work is happening on the ground with NRM regions. But so, for instance, if we go into a priority like biodiversity, we have yet to really truly define what that is, and there is a lot of work on the ground that the NRM regions are doing around biodiversity. So area of land managed for weed and animal pest management, number of landholders conducting biodiversity monitoring. So there's a lot of work there, but it's not really articulated through what specific industries this work is being done. We do a lot of the top-down reporting in terms of biodiversity. So the work that you do on the ground in terms of practice change, to amalgamate that and collaborate that and report on that is going to be, just like gold, and incredibly powerful in terms of demonstrating commitment on the ground. So I think it's not so much about more co-investment, but just collaborating together to do things better, to support all our goals and priorities, to demonstrate, you know, an Australian industry that is sustainably undergoing good practice change and impact.
Thanks, Edwina. Jacob, did you want to have a quick response about the dingo management?
Yeah, just quickly with the dingo management one. Interestingly enough, the Sustainability Steering Group talks about that a fair bit in regards to animal welfare side of things. So a lot of our Queenslanders and Northern Territorians talk about dingo and wild dog management, especially around calf loss. So they focus on that type of management and undertaking management around animal welfare issues rather than environmental sustainability and biodiversity. So while we don't report on it specifically, we do undertake some surveys around undertaking wild dog management and pest management and so forth going on like that, and it is captured in there. But yeah, we don't report on it specifically.
Thanks, Jacob. It's a tricky one, and I think it points to why the sustainability frameworks in Australia for Australian conditions are really important, so that we're not being our practices, agricultural practices and natural resource management practices aren't put in or looked at through a European lens, which is how a lot of it is happening at the moment. We've got a couple more questions. So from Michelle Young, is it ANU, I think. Thanks, Edwina. Can you comment about how we balance the need for national indicators with the need for biodiversity indicators that reflect the drivers of change in different ecosystems in Australia?
I actually might throw that one to Jacob. Sorry, not to throw you under the bus, Jacob, but you would have a lot more insights and granularity around that question, I think.
The insights are that, yeah, it is difficult, almost nigh impossible, especially with biodiversity. We do talk about how we can actually measure that. For instance, 1 kilogram of CO2 in Australia is equivalent to a kilogram of CO2 anywhere else in the world. However, 1 hectare of our eucalyptus ecosystems is entirely different to some of the alpine forests anywhere else. So how do we actually measure that? We have enough troubles within our own country, as you know, Michelle, figuring out with our vast geographical and climate differences, how a hectare in Northern Australia equates to a hectare in Tasmania or something like that. And that is, I guess, when you look at especially the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, where our biodiversity indicators, we are always working on, and we're always looking for better ways of undertaking that work. But we currently measure just active management to promote biodiversity rather than actual, I guess, the actual outcomes side of biodiversity. It is definitely a need, and you'll see things like the Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosures, the Science-Based Targets initiatives, they're all working towards that, especially to figure out ways that we can do that. And I know the TNFD version 3, I think, is open for a comment at the moment around those items.
Thanks, Jacob. Oh, the next question might be for Kate. So that's what I get for throwing everyone else under the bus by the looks of it. And that's Catherine Allen from NAC in Western Australia. So what are the next steps following on from the pilot work? Following on from James's question, is there work underway to develop a framework for how to implement the collection of data that be required from landholders and to demonstrate MLA outcomes against the framework? I will start us off, and then if I get any of it wrong, Jacob and Edwina can set me on the right path. So within the Industry Partnerships Project and the work that we did with Meat Livestock Australia, so on the beef and sheep, what we found was at that really high level, with the regional plans and the sustainability frameworks, that things did align. As soon as we got down low, we ran into all the problems that anyone who's been involved with NRM or setting targets and indicators and trying to line them up across the country run into. We're project-based, we manage a lot of our data via projects, all those sorts of things, and they don't necessarily align or even harmonise well across the country. In saying that, we're looking at working with the cotton industry on actually using regional NRM targets actually setting up targets with the cotton industry and the regions that grow cotton around biodiversity at the moment that meet the industry needs, are regionally appropriate, and can report back up either through the TFND or science-based targets for nature approaches. So we haven't done that with beef and sheep because there's 56 regions across the country and it's a nightmare. But we've started with cotton, and they've got 8 or 9 existing cotton regions. They have started looking at the Northern Australian stuff, which will be different. So there's that level of work. I'm talking to some of the extension staff in MLA because it might be that we just work at that delivery level, and harmonising indicators and targets for sustainability frameworks, but also for natural capital markets and all those sorts of things is kind of going on in the background, and it feels really messy at the moment. So we're just trying to work out a way of pulling some of that together. I don't know if that's enough, Catherine, but that's where we are at the moment. Any other comments, Edwina or Jake?
I think that's I think you've covered it. And I think the work that you've done with cotton will be highly important to demonstrate that that roadmap that you've carved out and what that looks like, and what's warts and what's been achieved and what needs more work. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question from Keith Walker. He's asking, would flora and fauna baselining for an enterprise be a good start for biodiversity assessment whilst the rigor of assessment standards are being sorted out? I think yes, possibly, but it's still the collation of that up to different levels and making sure that they align with both our industry, Australian industry targets, but also the national and international reporting requirements. That's messy. So yes, you can definitely do it. And Jacob is completely counteracting me. He's saying, yes, it's 100%. However, it's extremely resource intensive, which was about to be my next point. So I'm glad Jacob was much more succinct than I was.
And that speaks to the importance of starting to baseline everything you do, like baselining everything, your business practices, your farm management practices, all those things, like, you know, the diversity in terms of your flora and fauna, weed management practices, everything, start baselining and then start capturing that data and measuring, you know, whether you're going backwards or forwards. That's really important on the ground. You know, data that will become increasingly important. Again, we need to sort of start working out how to align that properly with the global disclosures. That's currently playing out, as Kate said. It's still a bit of a messy place, but those baselining activities are really important.
Are there any other questions? People, it's great, thank you. So even while we're still confused, Keith's got the answer he's looking for, which is good. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, then we'll bring things to a close. I am about to put a link to a feedback survey into the chat. If you can go in there and give me some feedback, that would be great. The other thing the feedback form is used for is for driving what topics people are really interested in for these webinars, which we'll keep doing roughly monthly. We'll start again in February, and they're just meant to give everyone a little bit of background because this space is moving fairly quickly. So thank you. Please fill in the feedback form. Thank you very much for your time and participation today. I really appreciate it. It's getting pretty close to Christmas and we still managed to get 30 people on the line. So I'm really pleased about that. A big thank you to Edwina and Jacob and Beck, who have obviously, without them, this would not have occurred. And we'll see you in 2023 for more webinars.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas.